All right, welcome back to JavaScript Dojo. So we're going to zig instead of zag here. We're on the final lesson. Glad to be done with this. It's been a interesting ride trying to teach and learn at the same time. So the DOM, what is the DOM? I'm going to kind of do this a little bit differently than what we had been doing. I'm not going to go fully through the lesson on the DOM because all this stuff, if you don't understand it, is just going to not make any sense. So DOM is document object model. So referring to web pages, what you would think of it as for HTML, the code that a web page is rendered in. HTML is like the snapshot of the website. And after the website has been snapshot, JavaScript basically is what can modify that code or make things look fancy when you're clicking things, or it can change the actual elements or the CSS. Basically, it's what happens after. And a good analogy that I read, think of the house like a blueprint. The HTML is the blueprint, and the DOM is actually the finished house, where JavaScript is basically like, oh, you can go and rearrange the room. So I'm going to look at just real high level stuff, but when you click or when you have an event happen on a page, that would be like changing styles. So title.text content, you can actually change the title, you can change the color of something with style and add whatever. So earlier, you can kind of think of if you see a element dot something, and it doesn't have parentheses, you can think of that as a property. And if it has parentheses, you can think of that as a method. So it's actually calling to do something. And earlier, I had kind of confused on my words on a couple of the lessons, but that's essentially what you're looking at when you see something like btn.addEventListener and then the actual function that's calling. What's the method? Basically, it's saying on click, do something. So button clicked. That's what you would do after the web page is loaded. So I'm not going to go into each of these. Just know that there's a lot of ways JavaScript can modify a page or modify an element. But if you don't understand what all that means, I think it's a better use of our time to show you a real simple way to grasp this. Because the goal of this was not to learn JavaScript perfect, but it was to get an idea of how the language works, to see if you want to go deeper in this language or know how web pages work. I think this lesson or this section will be pretty good because the way I'm going to kind of go over high level for the HTML with the JavaScript and how to actually view that on any web page. So if we come over here, we see this is the layout of a web page. HTML, basically when a browser opens, when it's rendering a page, it's looking for code similar to this. Of course, there's sections and divides and footers and the body, but this is the main structure. So HTML, head, title. So if I even look at the script for this particular page that we're on, you can always right click on any web page and go to inspect, and it pulls up all the elements and everything that's running. So if we're looking at here HTML, so this is the snapshot and JavaScript has already ran. So the neat thing about this is, let's just say we want to inspect a specific part of our page. So this is already, or just the background. So we'll inspect that text area and what's going on within that text area. Welcome. So that was before I refreshed the screen, but that's what it should say on there. And then we can say, okay, is there any event listeners? That's JavaScript, or the styles. How big is the font? All of that in the text area. So if I were to change 22 pixels to 50, look how huge that got on the left side there. And the cool thing is when you're analyzing websites, let's just say you're building something and you're like, oh, I want to make that more readable for my viewers. You can go in and kind of mess with that as long as you know what you're looking at. That was the goal of this, is so you recognize the code. So HTML head, title. But if we see here, there's a button And there's probably JavaScript. See how it's kind of moving when I highlight over it? So if I right click and inspect that element, then we can say, okay, what event listeners are on that element? They have a mouse move. So on mouse move, it's doing something. On mouse up, on click, it's going to even do something else. So maybe it'll send us to another page, or in this case, it would run. So on click, run. So that's part of it's what's happening after the page is loaded. And so you can say you're adding event listeners, and then you have things like divide and span and header and class. So, in your head, like on a web page, you might say, oh, there's scripts or CSS data or styling, but afterwards you want JavaScript to modify that. That's where the JavaScript would come in. So your page is set, you've built the web page, but you want to have it modify something post build. That's where the modifying the elements would come in. So looking at, we want to select by title. We want to get the query selector button. So get element by ID. So there's a bunch of things I'm not going to even touch, but your JavaScript code can grab all those elements, and you can modify or change what's either within those or change the actual elements themselves. And you can have different events, and that's what we're talking about on click, on mouse up, on mouse over, key down, submit. So that's where you can make the page start to seem dynamic. And creating elements, you can even make new elements. So let's just say new divided element, dot text content, or you could read that. So text content. So this is the property that you're going to have to learn a bunch of, I guess there's a bunch of different ones that you can use in JavaScript, but if you're building a page, you'll start using a lot of them, so you'll know what each one does. And the cool thing is if we go to any web page, so in this case, I'm on bing.com, and I did a Copilot search here, and it's got all this information that it returned. See how it's really small? Let's just say you're building a page and you're like, man, that's tiny, that's hard to see. If you right click and you click inspect on any public web page, you can kind of, if you know what you're looking at, and we know, looking on the right side over there, that there's a bunch of code that's showing us what the page is, that again, if we right click on where we want to inspect, now it's highlighted where we've inspected, and we can come look at the styles and say, well, what styles do they have? What kind of font do they have? Where's their font size? And then how can we modify that font size? So in styling, certain times inline styling versus cascading style sheets versus JavaScript, it may get modified anywhere in the document. So if we're looking at span, class, span, so we're looking at the code, these are all within, and think of it like a tree. So there's HTML, then there's the head, then inside the body, there's divides, there's text, there's paragraphs, and all of those different, you see the little caret, less than sign or greater than sign closes your HTML code. So you would recognize that's code, that's part of the HTML rendering, or if it was added with JavaScript. So, but we're looking for, let's find, okay, the word function is in this one. So now let's look at the style. We've clicked on that span that has the function word in it. See how it's highlighted on the left there? It's really small for you, so I want to make it bigger. So let's find where that code is. Right now it's set at 12 pixels. So if I were to just come in here just to see what it would look like at 40 pixels, let's see if it makes, let's see. Is that a bad example? Let's see. You inspect, so the class, so sometimes, so we've got 40 pixels, so it kept what I've changed, but it didn't modify the screen yet. So I need to find how can it actually modify what's controlling it. So let's look here. And we know that that was part of the Copilot rendering. So span, class, function. So it's got to be within the whole class then. So the layout, 16 font size, and we can highlight over its invalid property value. Okay. Let's see if it lets me just modify it temporarily here. All right, I'm going to try this one where I see 18 pixels. Let me make that bigger, 40 pixels. So no, that's actually modifying the background here. So let's just, okay, display block, no. I think you get the point. Let me look for it. I'm going to pause it real quick and look for the actual one. Or actually, let's just select something else on the page so that we know we can modify easier. The output inside their search might be a little funky, but you could find it in there. I already found it earlier, but I want to show you this without it taking forever. So we want to check, inspect the button. So now the buttons, so combine multiple tasks, lists, okay. Let's see. Hidden. So that's the border of the button, 1px solid. So what would happen if we change the width to like 10? Oh, you see how the button's getting wider? So let's do 50. Let's make a huge border. So now if we look at those, the border took over the whole word. So let's see. But you can kind of click around. If you know what you're looking for and you're building a page, all it is it's in a notepad and it's got the HTML and it builds the house. Now, if we were to take the JavaScript, we could even modify those buttons differently without actually having to have the span element. We could actually say, oh no, we want to change the element, span, querySelector, or if you want to select it however, there's a few different ways to select it in JavaScript, and then we can change it. So I would say the key takeaway is, and sorry for the delays and pauses there, but the key takeaway from this would be high level, it's a tree, the document object model, and it's after the rendering. So there's parents and child nodes, just like anything else in programming is if it's inherited or not, and does JavaScript take the parent, and is that automatically inherited? It's depending on how it's coded, but if you're recognizing the HTML code and the event listeners and how JavaScript's being used, you should be able to use that information to build whatever you want. And I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. I think all the different ways that JavaScript can be used. Front end, I built a few websites, and since I wasn't great at JavaScript, instead of having functions, I had a lot of individual lines, whereas I could have reused that function. So functions are reusable. JavaScript variables, you can utilize that to store information and call it back later. So if you're using that in a website, you may say, okay, all these different colors, if someone clicks on this, then you can actually have JavaScript say, if mouse over on click, boom, change the color. And so you could even just make a fun website where the mouse is just doing stuff and there's no point to the website. You don't need to actually change pages. And then the conditionals, you know, the ifs, the operators, comparison. So if, and you can get fancy and you can do things timing based, you can do things, okay, every 30 seconds, have the page background change colors. That's where the programming on a web page would be kind of fun. And I think as AI comes, you can write a web page with AI by just saying, oh, build this. But then if it's one little part's off and you don't know what you're looking at, you're going to have to go back to AI and say, oh, the section with this, how do you know how to explain it? So if you understand some of the basics of the programming languages, then you could either A, go in and modify that one example or that one issue you're having, or let's say it's Python. That's one that I got certified in. But let's just say you've wrote this whole program and it's a Windows program and it opens a file on your desktop, or it's organizing icons or whatever you're doing with that. If you don't understand at least the basics, sure, after you know the basics, have the AI build the tool, but you're more of like the orchestrator. And if you're just blindly using AI and you don't know what the code means and there's an issue, and you don't have tokens for the AI to rebuild it, or wait 4 hours to use the next model again. I think that you could solve a bunch. There's been many times where I just go in, even this tool I'm using, I had AI help me build it just to kind of teach and learn at the same time. But the text was really small in all of these areas. And I went in, instead of having it rebuild the whole tool, I went in and modified the code. So if I were just inspecting this on my own page, then I could say, okay, what's the actual value here? So 13 pixels. And now to make that bigger, 50, boom. Whoa, that's huge for everybody. But that, I actually saved it in my file on the other end. So if we come back and look at this one, let's take a look here. If we come back, and this is what I was going to show you. So on my actual learning tool, I had to actually make these sizes big enough to be readable. So if I inspect, I actually went in and said, okay, what's the font size? And changed the font size. So if I were to change it to 50, oh my gosh, that's huge. But once I was happy with how big it was, thinking maybe you could see it on YouTube, I went into my actual notepad and changed the code there. And that's kind of a tool that you'll learn and use, and the inspect is awesome. You can do it on any web page or your own web page, and then anything can be edited just in a notepad document if it's saved as .html. Then you could have your JavaScript code because the browser will render it. You just have to know, script is for JavaScript, and HTML codes like HTML, the little carets. So, okay. Leave me a comment if this was helpful. It was all over the place. This whole series was all over the place, but it was fun to do. And I'll see you guys in the future. Bye-bye.